What's going on, everybody? This is Brian Mazik, aka Unique Mazik, the hardest working man in sports and gaming, and we're talking about the Chicago Bulls. Trade deadline just passed. The Bulls did at least one move. I don't know. We still got a couple more hours left when I'm actually going live with this video, and so they did the Otto Porter deal and got him in there. Starting five is not horrible on paper, but obviously we still need to step some things up. But I think really the primary piece of conversation, outside of Otto Porter, of course, is the draft. I mean, when you got the fourth worst record in the NBA, that's the only thing you're looking at. You're looking at the draft. If it's February and you got the fourth worst record in the league, you're looking at the draft. So, fourth worst record in the league means you have the fourth best chance of getting the number one pick. And obviously, if you're going to be bad, that's what you want. You want to win the lottery. So if you win the lottery, which is a decent possibility when you're fourth, um, you have to be thinking about, in the best case scenario, who do you want to draft? So for me, that question comes down to two people, right? It's about Zion Williamson of Duke, man child, freakishly athletic, freakishly strong, just different type of an athlete from Duke, or Morant, the super fast point guard from Murray State. And coincidentally, they're both from South Carolina, played on the same, I believe, AAU team, or they definitely played together when they were in high school, so they know each other. So that's kind of interesting, right? So for me, you kind of got to look at this a couple ways. So I'm going to start off talking about from a statistical standpoint, which is only going to tell you so much, right? Because they're playing on the college level. Both guys are playing against different levels of competition. So while I think there's something to be said for it, not everything, right? But let's talk about Zion first. Zion is playing on a super talented college team where he's pretty much the best player. I didn't mention RJ Barrett as a potential pick if you get the number one, because I don't think you can take, I wouldn't personally take RJ Barrett over Zion or Morant. I wouldn't. Maybe some teams would. And I'm not downing RJ Barrett. I think he has a solid game, better than solid. He's a really good player. But I have some questions with his ability to finish at the rim on the next level, on an elite level. Like, I have some issues, some questions about that. He's also not a great shooter, and if he's not, because he's not a super explosive athlete and not a great shooter, I, I'm a little. Here's the thing: the Bulls need to hit when you're picking in the top four, you need to hit a home run, right? You need to draft a potential or future superstar. And if you have any question in your mind as to whether the guy you're drafting in the top four can become a future superstar, you need to have significant pause about selecting that guy. And I have some pause about RJ Barrett, which is the reason why I didn't include him in this whole debate, right? But Zion Williamson, 22 points a game, played 22 games. He's shooting 68% from the field. Gets a lot of dunks, of course. Shooting just under 66% from the free throw line, which of course is troubling because of how much he figures to get fouled. Shooting about 29% from three-point range, which I think is a little concerning, but not too concerning, because I can see Zion playing in a lot of pick and roll scenarios and being an elite rim runner, along the lines of Clint Capella, but obviously shorter, significantly shorter, because I believe Zion is going to measure somewhere in the neighborhood of 6'6", and in shoes about maybe 6'8". That's what I'm thinking he's going to measure at the combine, right? So that's going to be considered a smaller power forward, but because he's so athletic and so strong, he may be able to compensate for some of that, right? But clearly, you'd love for him to be able to play a three, but I don't think he can play the three um, from an offensive standpoint, because he's not a shooter. Maybe he can. Maybe he can, and he could create some crazy matchup issues because you're playing him at the three. I think the real question is going to be like, can he defend the three and the four? If he can defend the three and the four and maybe the five in some situations, then it gives you um, a lot of different leeway and versatility in what you can do with him, right? But that's where he had 9.5 rebounds, 2.3 assists, 2.2 steals, and 2 blocks, right? That's pretty crazy. Like I I'm gonna talk about player, comparisons in a second, but it's difficult to find somebody that you can say he played like this. So I'm gonna struggle to do that, but I'm gonna come up with something in a second. But so those are the statistics for Zion. So just basic stuff, not too crazy going like whatever. His total shooting percentage is 70%, which is pretty solid. Obviously, he would have a little bit better there if he was a better three-point shooter. His box plus minus, which is basically a box score estimate of the points per 100 possessions a player has contributed above what the league average, or in this situation is the national average, translated to an average team. And he's at 20.2, which is pretty high for sure. It's pretty high. So one thing I think is also interesting, because he does play in a big conference, is that his numbers are higher against ACC teams, and I think that is important to note. Shooting 70% against ACC teams, 24 points a game, 9.7 rebounds, 2 steals, 2.1 blocks, 2.6 assists. He shows up when he's playing against a big time team, so that's important to know, right? But let's look at Ja Morant. And you guys notice I haven't said who I prefer yet. Ja Morant. Now he's not playing in anywhere near the same level of conference that that Zion plays in. Murray State doesn't see the type of competition that Duke does in the ACC. They don't, right? It's just a matter. It's just a fact. But Ja is, I don't want to discredit what he's doing so much. He's averaging 24 points a game, 5.6 rebounds, 10.3 assists, and now this is his sophomore season. So that's something also that because a lot of people hadn't heard of him before this year. So they probably thought he was probably thought he was a freshman, but he's not. He actually played 34 minutes a game last year. And he averaged 12.7 points, 6 assists last year. So he has literally like almost doubled his points and assist numbers, and he's playing about the same minutes this year that he played last year. So just exponential growth for the most part across the board, and that's what you want to see. He's 6'3", 175, and I think he's going to measure right around in there. He might even measure as much as 6'4" in shoes. I think that could happen, right? Long arms, but he's very thin, very thinly built. So that's one thing. So you see the statistics, you see the breakdown there, right? So now let's talk about the Bulls specifically, their positional needs, right? It's hard to say the Bulls have a strength, right? Because you got the fourth worst record in the league. But I would say if everybody's healthy, you'd have to look at the power forward and the center position as positions of somewhat of strength, right? You got Larry Markkinen at the 4, you got Wendell Carter Jr. at the 5. I think both of those guys have shown great potential, right? Markin is kind of struggling to kind of find his way this year. I think he and Zach are kind of struggling to see and find how they're supposed to play together. Um, I think they both had a great game against the Kings, even though they lost 125 to 120. Well, I guess that was Wednesday night. But I think Markkinen had 30 or 28 or something, and Zach had 28 or 30. It was right there in that range. They lost, but they both guys scored the basketball, and that's pretty much for them what you want. And what you really also like about the way Zach played in that, it was the Pelicans, not the Kings. What you really like the way Zach played in that game is that he was pretty efficient, just under 50% from the field, just under 50% from 3-point range. Laurie was 5 for 10 from 3-point range. He was over 50%. Laurie had 30 and 10, and Zach had 28, 8 and 7. The Bulls lost this game, and they were at home, but that's kind of what you're hoping that they can deliver. Um, Timothy Luwawu Cabaret, I don't know how long he's going to be on the team, but he was a factor on the floor, I thought. So um, the front court, Wendell Carter Jr. is hurt, but the front court, I think, is the bigs are have to be looked at as a little bit of a strength. The problem, if you can say that, is questioning if Chris Dunn is the type of guy, the type of real needle mover. And I use that term a lot because I think it's really important in basketball more than in any other sport. Certain stars and certain positions have to be needle movers, right? They got to be guys who don't just get numbers. They change they change things on the floor. They're like, if I'm not playing, our chances of winning drastically go down. Me individually, if I'm not saying I score a lot, but whatever it is I bring to the team, if it's not there, we're not as good of a team, right? And I'm not sure that Chris Dunn is that guy. He had a really good game yesterday too. 18 points, 8 assists, 2 steals. One of the best, I think, perimeter defenders in the league. I really believe that. But I'm not sure if he is that guy who changes things. And because the point guard position has become so important in the league. I mean, it's always been important, but it feels like it's even more important right now. Just somebody that's running the offense because the game is so offensive right now. I just don't know if Chris Dunn is that guy. And I think that Zach likes to have the ball in his hands, but he might be able to, I think the Bulls may benefit from having him play off the ball sometimes. And because I think he's a good enough shooter, even though he is a rhythm shooter, I think he's a good enough shooter to make some stuff out of off of spot up situations, and also get some 3-point opportunities running through screens, and then being able to attack closeouts because of how great of an athlete he is. I think that's a style that he's never really had an opportunity to play because he hasn't played alongside a point guard who, um, you know, could command that much attention himself. So, from a positional need standpoint, I really think the Bulls need Ja Morant more than they need Zion Williamson. Uh, I'm not even necessarily saying that Ja is a better prospect, even though I kind of think he is. But I just think from a positional need standpoint, the Bulls could use Ja Morant more, right? So let's talk about the player comps, right? For me, when I look at Ja Morant, and I'm gonna let you guys know, I'm usually pretty good at player comps. I've been doing this. I started off writing about almost 10 years ago for Bleacher Report. And one of the first things that I was doing at that point was evaluating NBA talent and writing mock drafts and things like that. Nobody's always right. Sometimes people are wrong. I remember I thought that um, Andre Drummond. One of the things I was really high on Andre Drummond, and he is a really good player, but I might have been a little too high on him coming out of the draft. But I was really high on him. So you don't get it all. You don't get it right all the time. Um, but I'm pretty good at it. So my player comp right now for John Morant is it's looking De'Aaron Fox-ish, Russell Westbrookish type of that's like a mixture there. That's what I see. He's got that body frame of De'Aaron Fox. He has that relentless attacking style of Russell Westbrook. He has insane athleticism and hops. He can finish up above the rim. I don't know that he finishes with the ferocity that Russell Westbrook does. So I would think definitely, I mean, De'Aaron Fox will dunk you too, and he'll finish over you similarly. But there's a little more finesse, I think, there than there is with Russell. I mean, Russell plays angry, which is it works for him, right? So I think I see some Ja in. I think I see a hybrid of those two guys in Ja. That's another reason why I'm super excited about the prospects of him in the league. Zion is like I said, is a much harder guy to kind of put a label on or a comp on, right? But pressed to me, I see him as he's also another hybrid. I have him as a hybrid between Larry Johnson and Kenneth Faried. And I say that because I almost want to say Larry Johnson offensively, Kenneth Faried defensively, because Kenneth Faried, his arms are probably longer than Zion, but Kenneth Faried is pretty much a undersized power forward. But his length, his activity, his desire on the floor when at his best, best years with Denver, right? He was able to play bigger than he was. And he's also a good athlete. Not the type of athlete or the physical specimen that Zion is, but definitely a plus athlete. Zion has that same type of an impact on defense, perhaps even more. I think he's a much better, he's even a better shot blocker than Fareed, at least on the college level. You don't necessarily expect him to block 2 shots a game in the NBA, but he might, right? But from an offensive standpoint, I see a lot of Larry Johnson. Larry turned into a good 3-point shooter late in his career once he dropped some of his athleticism because of the back injury. But Zion is even more powerful than Larry. But explosively, he's more explosive than Larry. But Larry was really explosive before he hurt his back. We're talking about grandmama days with Charlotte. And so while neither Fareed or LJ are perfect comparisons, I see a little bit of both of those guys in Zion. And I don't know that we've ever seen a player like that. Doesn't mean he's a better prospect than Ja. Like I said, I think Ja's a better prospect, but that's a really special combination. So don't get me wrong. If the Bulls end up and walking away from this draft with Zion Williamson, I'm very excited. And at that point, you gotta ask the Bulls then have a question to ask themselves. What are we gonna do with Laurie Markkinen and Wendell Carter Jr.? Because you don't bring Zion Williamson to your team to sit and to be a 6 man. I mean, not for the long term. So what are you doing at that point? And it just isn't enough minutes. And Zion can't play the 3, and Laurie can't play the 3. Wendell Carter could play the 4 or the 5, but that's it. And Laurie can play the 4. He maybe can play the 5 if you're going small. And Zion can play the 4, but I just don't think it's not enough shooting on the floor. Well, maybe it is. I don't know if there's enough shooting on the floor, and I don't know if Zion can defend the threes, which is worrisome for me. So it's just a much easier fit to me if the Bulls draft Ja Morant, because there's some things that they would do after that. But then before we even go down that route, let's talk about something that I think is really important that the Bulls lack and they need. The Bulls need leadership. They need real leadership on the floor. I think Zach wants to be that guy, and I think he could be, but I think he has to make himself a better defender before he can do that, because he needs to grab that respect from his coaching and from his coaches as well as his teammates as somebody who's going to bear down and play defense. He doesn't have to be Kawhi Leonard, but he needs to give a little bit better effort on that end of the floor. And I think that's the piece that's missing from his overall leadership. But I think that Ja has that type of potential. I don't know that Zion does. And if you're drafting a guy that high, and I don't mean this as a knock on Zion at all, but Zion is a fantastic athlete. He's a doer. He's a doer. He's a dude that's like, hey, just as long as I know what I'm supposed to do, I'm on it. But I don't know that he's that guy who is leading a team. He could be, but I don't know that. But I feel like I see that already in Ja. And maybe it's because he plays point guard and naturally that's where a leadership thing kind of comes to. But I like that. When you're looking at stuff like star potential, which I think is important for a lot of different reasons, it helps in terms of maybe free agent recruiting, which the Bulls have never done well. It also helps, obviously, from a monetary standpoint and from a marketing standpoint, which the Bulls don't really need that either. The Bulls are horrible, and they sell out every game. So, but from a star potential, I think both guys check that box, but Zion might check it a little bit more because, I mean, Zion is probably I would say if you're just talking about basketball, Zion's probably the third or fourth most searched name in basketball over the last 12 months. I don't think that's a stretch to say that. Like, this kid is just taking over, right? So there's that. But let's talk about potential downside. And then after that, I'm going to give you my definitive recommendation and what I think the Bulls should do. The potential downside for Zion, let's start with Ja, is that we find out that he's actually a bit of a bust because he hasn't been playing against top competition. He struggles shooting the basketball, and he's very thin, and his lack of physical strength wind up being a major issue, and it prevents him from ever being the guy who we thought he could be. So that to me is the potential downside, right? Might not happen. I think it might not happen, right? Now, the potential downside for Zion Williamson is that he's a tweener. Just he is. He's 6'7", 6'8". He's a tweener. That's not a power forward size, or not an ideal power forward size. His inability to become a stretch four, or a guy who can just knock down threes well enough to play the three, or a guy who cannot defend threes and turns out to be a little too small to accurate or to adequately defend fours. Um, and he turns out to be more of a dunker than anything. Essentially, he's a spectacular role player. That's what ends up happening, right? So he's like a big, huge, muscle bound Sean Marion, which might not be that bad, right? Because Sean Marion had some great seasons, but maybe that's what that. And then the other thing is the kid's he's 280 pounds, right? So you always wonder about how long can that type of frame, playing this explosive athletic game that he plays, how long can he be that and be healthy? You know, you never wish an injury on anybody, but you have to think about that when you're drafting someone. So that's a question, a real legitimate question I think the team should have to ask themselves. Hasn't had these injury histories yet, but you just hope and pray that that doesn't happen to him, but you do have to think about it. So I think that's the potential downside. So all of that said, my strong recommendation, if the Bulls were to find themselves in position to draft Ja Morant or Zion Williamson, and they're having to weigh their situation, if you consider their positional needs, the talent that both guys have, the potential for leadership, I think to me the clear choice is Ja Morant. Um, I think getting Ja Morant immediately gives you an opportunity to trade Chris Dunn, and who I think still has trade value. You move him, and you're able to add other assets. You get a dynamic player or talent at the point guard position who, teamed with Zach LaVine, gives you maybe the most athletic backcourt in the league. You got a guy who is a proven distributor, proven scorer at that position, who can set up, Laurie, can set up Zach, can set up Wendell Carter Jr. And you have Otto Porter on the floor as well as someone else to stretch, to space the floor. And you got him and Laurie that can space the floor. Wendell Carter can knock the shot down from 17 feet and a little bit further out. And then you got two attacking style players like Zach and Ja, and both of those guys can shoot too. Offensively, the Bulls start to look like a team with some really serious weapons, and Ja is in position to be the engine that pushes all of that. You know, I like the way that sounds. And then on top of that, you're moving Dunn and getting assets there. You still got Chandler Hutchinson coming off the bench. Okay. You still got Ryan Arcidiacono coming off the bench, who I love as a backup point guard. And then if I'm the Bulls, I want to sign a veteran point guard who can then mentor Ja Morant. I think that makes great sense. You might even consider keeping Shaq Harrison because he's such a good defensive point guard as well. So for me, that is a fantastic look. I would love Blakeney back, but I don't think he'll be back, because I really don't think Boylan likes him, because he's not a great defender. Doesn't really care much about trying to be, but I don't have a problem with Blakeney because he's supposed to be an instant offense guy off the bench, and you don't ask that guy necessarily to be a great defender. Um, but that is what it is. For me, that's the thing. Now, you could go with Zion, and like I said, but if to me you go with Zion, you really have a tough decision to make. You got to decide who you're trading. Is it Laurie or is it Wendell Carter Jr.? Because to me, one of them has to be traded, and it seems more like Laurie would have to be traded. And then you be trading Laurie Marketing, a guy whose game seems to perfectly match the era, for a undersized power, to put an undersized power forward whose game we're not even sure how it translates to the NBA today. And That makes me nervous. That makes me nervous. I like John Morant for the Bulls over everybody else in this draft. So that's my take. It's a rather long take, but I had to kind of break it down. But I appreciate you guys watching. As always, God bless. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you dig it. Peace.